about them, don't I? I got opinions and attitudes and problems. And yeah, the best I could ever say is, well, they're all right, but. Right? And typically, I'm not even saying they're all right. I'm saying, well, that son of a bitch. Let me tell you about him. Because I am so much locked in this focus of how you can make me happy. How you can make me happy. The book says that we have to quit playing God. What does that mean? What does that mean? We throw this word around in Alcoholics Anonymous sometimes, this word perfectionist. We're perfectionists, right? We're the lazy perfectionists. I think there should be another term for it, right? Perfectionist fatiguious or something, right? Because a real perfectionist will do everything they can to make everything perfect, right? And they will work hard until everything's perfect. And some of you might be that way. I'm not that way. I'm the perfectionist that goes, everything has to be perfect. Oh, there's no point in doing it, so I'm going to do nothing, right? I'm a lazy perfectionist, right? I'm the, well, then there's no point kind of perfectionist. But my insistence that everything in life is perfect, if from a spiritual standpoint, if I take a step back and I think about what God is, isn't God the only perfect thing? Isn't God where perfection exists? And when I'm playing God, aren't what I'm trying to do is demand perfection from me and perfection from you? We have to quit playing God. We have to allow the world to unfold and the journey to unfold in front of us. And how do we do that? What is it that a guy like me really needs God for? Now, I do need God to help me stay sober. And as Don so eloquently talked about, his sponsor telling him to ask God in the morning and ask God at night to keep him sober. And I need God to help me stay sober. But by the time I get to this part of the book, the assumption is that I'm sober. And is that all I need God for? And if that's all I need God for, then maybe I don't need to go any further. Unless you're like me and you couldn't stay sober unless you found relief, right? I got to find freedom more than relief. But what does a guy like me need God for? What a guy like me needs God for is because these pages, this 61 and 62 and part of 63, is how I behave unchecked. That I am in the world fighting everyone, scratching and clawing and demanding and requiring that everybody makes me happy. I am what they refer to as king baby. I want everything done for me the way I want it, when I want it, and I want it done now, and you better do it right. And if you don't do it right, I'm going to have a tantrum. And this is what I need God for. So when Don talks about the third step prayer, and he talks about I'm going to turn my will and my life over to the care of God, my will, my thinking, my life, my actions, it is because in my hands, left to my own devices, what I have been capable of doing in my life is regardless of the outside circumstances. And some people come to AA when they first get sober quite affluent with great outside circumstances, and others come like me through a homeless shelter or a halfway house. But that's not the thing that we have in common. But that in my hands with my life, I've showed up in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous unable to stay sober, and in a state of abstinence, keenly aware that me and everybody around me, is a no-good son of a bitch. That the people on this planet are terrible, my family's terrible, I don't like them, they don't like me. That life is painful, boring, and abstract, and it's just too hard. It's just too hard. And if God exists, he plays a cruel joke. And this is how I've shown up at Alcoholics Anonymous, broken and empty, left to my own devices. So I'm going to say to God, God, take my will and my life, take my thoughts and my actions so I can try and find some unity in this world. Relieve me, the prayer says, of the bondage of self, that I am tied up and locked up in me, that I am a prisoner of my mind, that I am trapped in a jail of my own creation, that I am alone, surrounded by people that even if I could, I wouldn't want to be close to them, full of judgment, full of anger, full of envy. Relieve me of the bondage of self so I can better do your will, God, because my will is killing me. Get me free from me. Release me from the madness that is in my head. How do I do that? Well, that's what the journey of the rest of the steps is for. It was told to me when I was brand new that in step 3, and Don talked about this, that this is just a decision. Our friend Kent Coleman has the best way of talking about it. He says when he woke up this morning and he decided to go to work, he didn't magically show up at work. He was still laying in bed having decided to go to work. And when I did my 3rd step prayer and I decided to turn my will and my life over to the care of God, it was still desperately in my hands. There was actions that had to be taken for our friend Kent to make it to work. He had to get up, brush his teeth, take a shower, put the coffee on, go downstairs, get in the car, drive the car, park the car, get out of the car, walk all the way into the office, sit down at his desk, and open his files and start working. There was a lot to do after the decision. And there's a lot for us to do after the decision. And it was told to me that step 3, Sheldon, really in its basic form, is that you're going to make a decision to do step 4 in its most basic form. That at the end of step 3, we take this, we say this prayer, and we get up off our knees and we do the rest of the work. If you guys would humor me, I'd like to end the session. Those of us that know it, if you would join me in the 3rd step prayer, would that be okay with everybody? Let's pray. God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I might better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help. Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. I think we're done for that. Is there any announcements that need to be made, John? Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Sheldon Fetty, I'm an alcoholic. It's nice to have gotten some sleep between last time I seen you guys. So it's so last night we talked about this selfishness and self-centeredness, this thing that drives me, this prison in my mind that I'm in. And the next order of business for me is to try and identify where that really exists in my own life. When I got sober, my sponsor would tell me all the time, you got to read 60 through 63. You got to read. I'd go to him with any problem. You know, the guys in the home group would do it. Oh, you need to read 60 through 63. My work life is, this is going on in my body. You need to read 60 through. It's almost like he didn't really know what to tell me, so he would tell me, read 60 through 63. And trying to identify the selfishness and the self-centeredness and the self-centered fear and the thing that drives me was very, very difficult for me until I actually got down to business, paper and pen, and wrote out these resentments. But when I was new, and somebody would say, you know, you need to do your 4th step. Have you written your 4th step? What about the 4th step? It was a very scary proposition for me. I don't know what it's like in Alabama, but in Vegas, if you go to a meeting and you say that you want to talk about step 4 or you're thinking about doing your 4th step, you'll get a couple of different responses. One of the responses you'll get is, ooh, ooh, don't do that. That's scary. It's terrible. Another response you'll get is good, because if you don't do a 4th step and you don't do it right, you're going to die. You will die if you don't do your 4th step. So I know one thing, I know it's scary. I know that another thing is that I'm going to die if I don't do it. And anything that's scary and that might kill me, I'm not really interested in at all. And then the other thing is that you'll get 100 different versions, workbooks and processes, and all these confusing different ways that you could write a 4th step and ways that it could look. And so I'm confused and I'm afraid and I'm scared and I'm going to die and I don't know what to do. And I'm stuck. And my sponsor took me to the big book and he said, there are some really simple, clear-cut directions on how to do an inventory out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, what's funny and what has amused me over the years is that when you hear people talk about step 4 out of the big book, You'll hear some people refer to it as a 4-column inventory. It is 4 columns out of the big book. Sometimes you'll hear people refer to it as a 5-column inventory. I'm not sure if this is a 4-column group or a 5-column group, right? But we all swear we're doing it out of the big book exactly the way it's written in the book. I personally do a 6-column inventory, right? Because I'm an alcoholic and the more is better, right? And hopefully we'll have time and we'll talk a little bit about what those 6 columns are. But one of the things that I think is super important is to understand that what is really important here is that we do the inventory. And exactly what it looks like is less important. Now that might sound like AA heresy. There are people at Alcoholics Anonymous who I love and respect that will tell you if you don't dot the I's exactly where they dot the I's, and you don't cross the T's exactly where they cross the T's, you're doing it wrong. They'll tell you that people in AA, unless you are exact in your format, we're killing people around here, which I take a little bit of a resistance to. In the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, in Bill's story on page 13, it talks about Bill going through the steps. It talks about the process that he did. And it talks about that process before his white light experience. Bill's white light experience that we talk about, the Bill Wilson spiritual experience, happens on page 14 after he goes through the steps. But if you look at the way he went through the steps, our founder, the foundation of the program that saved my life, he did it wrong. So we should all be dead. So the experience is the experience. The work is the work. We're looking for God, and there's mystery and there's mysticism, and the spirituality exists in the spaces and in the gaps. What's really important, though, is that we do the work, that we do what Don was talking about yesterday, that we seek God. The exact format of how we do it is less important than the fact that we're seeking. Having said that, if I'm your sponsor, I have an exact format where we will dot the I's my way and we will cross the T's my way. And if you don't do it the way I show you, you're going to die. So let's talk a little bit about what that format looks like. It says on the bottom of page 63, it says, next we launched on a course of vigorous action. It gives me a timeline of how quickly I'm supposed to start this work. Right after I get up off my knees from doing that 3rd step prayer, the book says we launched. And launched, I think, gives me a timeline, right? I mean, if you're going to launch, you're going to do it when? Like now, right? I mean, you can't really launch slowly, right? I mean, I suppose you could, but the slowest you could launch would be 10, 9, 8, right? I mean, that's a slow countdown to a launch. We go quickly. On the course of vigorous action, we're going to take some effort and we're going to do some work. And this is really the first time that we're going to do an outward display, that we're going to actually do some real work in Alcoholics Anonymous. It feels like 1, 2, and 3 are work. But really what they are is contemplation and thinking about my favorite topic, me, all right? But now we're actually going to do some physical work. It says, therefore, we started a personal inventory. A business that takes no regular inventory usually goes broke. I'm in the car business. And we have to do inventory all the time. We have to know what we have, what we own it for, what the values of it are. It says that if we fool ourselves about values and we don't get rid of the damaged or unsaleable goods, we're in trouble. And in my life, what I had to do is I have to look at what it is that is driving me, what it is that I think is important, what it is that is running through my head constantly. I don't know if you're like me. I'm the guy that when I go to bed at night, I'm constantly doing inventory. I'm thinking about what those sons of guns did, what they said, what they didn't do, what they're supposed to be behaving like, what they're doing wrong. I'm running all this stuff through my head, and I got to get this out and got to get this on paper. The book says at the bottom of 64, it says, resentment is the #1 offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. I got a note in my book above that with a question mark that says, more than whiskey? More than whiskey? If you have the experience, and I'm sure many of you do, of going to detoxes or treatment centers, and we always find that guy that's in treatment and he was sober for a while. Not the guy that couldn't stay sober, but the guy that had a couple of 3 years or 5 years or 10 or even 20 years of sobriety. And he found himself getting drunk again, and he's sitting in the treatment center. I'm always interested by that guy. And I want to go up and I want to ask him what happened. Because from self-preservation, right, I want to know what it was that ended that guy back up in treatment. And you hear a lot of different stories, but a lot of times what you end up hearing is, well, you know, she was doing this, or my boss did that. And they've got this anger towards something that happened as their excuse, their reason for drinking. Now, we all know that it's kind of nutty, right? I mean, I've never had a problem or a resentment that drinking couldn't make worse. But resentment seems to be the thing that drives many of us out. Because I get blocked from God. I get that noise in my head. I get the comments and the anger and the ba, 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 ba. My sponsor likes to say that when I'm in that head state, I wouldn't be able to hear God if he was on my shoulder with a bullhorn, all right? When I've got that noise in my head. So resentment seems to destroy more alcoholics than anything else because it can drive us back to drinking. But what about that guy in your home group or that time in my life where I felt this way, where I've managed to stay physically sober, but through resentment and anger, I seem to be separated from everybody around me. I'm not able to have a good or happy life. I'm locked up in fear. I'm locked up in anger, in judgment. Everybody around me, I see problems and trouble, and it just feels like life is difficult, and I'm unable to have any happiness or joy. People in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I know there was a great tragedy here recently. I've heard many stories and known people very close to me in my community in Las Vegas that resentment gets them to a point where they feel so alone and so separate that they end up making the supreme sacrifice. And so we can get in trouble in many different ways, and drinking is one of the ways we can get in trouble. But resentment and anger and fear and frustration and the things that step 4 and then step 5 are designed to give me relief from can cause me trouble not only by driving me to drink, but by leading me to have a very difficult and miserable, angry life, and also lead me to make that supreme sacrifice. So resentment seems to cause more trouble for us than anything else. I have to be free if I'm going to be able to live any kind of a successful and enjoyable life. I have to be free of this stuff. So how do I do it? How do I get free? And the book gives me this set of directions, and at the bottom of page 64, it says we listed the people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. So I'm simply going to make a list. I'm going to write a list of the people that I'm mad at. And when I start to write my 4-step, I have this strange idea that somehow I'm different than everybody else, right? I think that my 4-step is going to be unique. I really don't want to write that stuff down because I don't want to share it with you because you're going to judge me horribly, and I just know that you're not like me. But if you're new, I got to tell you that we could write your inventory for you, right? We don't because it's fun to watch you squirm, all right? But first name on the list, Dad. Second name on the list, Mom. Third name on the list, my current wife or girlfriend. Fourth name on the list, my brothers and sisters. Fifth name on the list, my boss. Sixth name on the list, my previous girlfriend or spouse. Seventh name on the list, my previous boss, then my previous girlfriend, then my previous boss. And then it trickles down through my uncles and aunts to anybody that's had any meaningless contact with me in my pathetic little life to this point so far. If I've had more than a couple of conversations with you, you're going to be on my inventory. One of the names that was on my inventory was my 3rd grade lunch lady. I was 28 years old when I shared my first inventory. I was 6 or 7 or 8 when this lunch lady was serving me lunch. I had a real resentment against her. I hated her. The way that she did this, just really. And I carried that with me forwards in life. The first name on my list was my dad. I hated my dad. My dad left when I was 2 years old. The next name on my list was my mom. Living with my mom when I was a kid was very difficult. She was an angry woman, and she suffered from panic attacks and withdrawals from society because of whatever, and I just didn't feel any love from her, and I hated my parents. And my brother was on the list, and so on and so forth. So I write these names down. And then it says we asked ourselves why we were angry. Well, I was angry with my dad because he left. I was 2 years old. I was 2 years old when he left, and I tell you, he didn't just leave me. If it had just left me, that was one thing. But he didn't just leave the home. There wasn't just a divorce. I had other friends that were divorced, that were in a divorce situation, and the dad stayed in town. The dad would be there every other Wednesday, and he'd be there on weekends, and he'd show up to their sporting events, and he'd be there for birthdays, and he'd be there for holidays. But my dad, when he left the town of Leeds where we grew up, and he moved to London, 200 miles away. And from London, he moved to Canada. From Canada, he moved to Southern California, which is how my family, or how he ended up going from England, where we were born, to Southern California. And he ended up living 6,000 miles away, and I would see him once a year, if that. And so it wasn't just that he left my mom, but he left the whole family, and I hated him for it. I hated him for leaving, and then he asked what was affected, and everything's affected, right? Financially, we were affected. I was affected because I felt like I didn't have a dad in my life. I wasn't taught anything. I didn't get my own way there. I didn't feel loved. I felt cut off. I felt different. I felt separated. Every area of self was affected. Self-esteem, my financial security, personal relations, everything's affected. And so I start out writing this inventory very similar to the diagram on page 65. I've got 3 columns. I've got column 1, I'm resentful at my dad. Column 2, the cause because he left. Column 3, what's affected. Everything really except sex relations. Self-esteem was affected. Security, personal relationships were interfered with. The whole thing, my whole life is turned upside down by this with my dad. My sponsor said to me, and I do this with guys that I sponsor that are brand new in AA. If you've been around a while and you come to me and you want help, I'll have you write the whole inventory on your own. But my sponsor did something with me that I think was very effective, and I do this with guys that I sponsor. He had me only write the first 3 columns, and then we wrote the rest of the columns together while we did my 5th step, which I think was so important for me because I wouldn't have been able to find the insights that I was able to find by myself. So the next name on my list is my mom. My mom, I didn't feel like she loved me enough. She screamed and yelled a lot. I felt judged by her. I felt like she held back from me a lot. And what was affected, again, everything's affected. So I show up to my sponsor's house with these first 3 columns written. And we start to talk about my dad. And I tell you, I was unable to let my dad off the hook. My reaction, if you would have asked me why I drank, if you would have asked me why my life was a mess, I would have told you it was because my dad left when I was young. Before my dad left, we were a middle-class family in a Jewish neighborhood. My dad left, and we become a Section 8 family on the wrong side of the tracks, a welfare family, food stamps, the whole 9 yards. A lot of prejudice growing up. I was the oddball in the community. My whole life was my dad's fault, and I drank because of my dad. If my dad hadn't have left, I probably wouldn't have ended up an alcoholic drug addict. Everything was his fault, and I hated my dad. And my sponsor's trying to get me to let him off the hook. He's trying to explain to me that I need to find some freedom from this anger towards my dad, and if I can't find this freedom, I'm likely to drink again. But I can't find a way to let him off the hook. And my sponsor says to me this thing that made me crazy. He said, maybe your dad did the best he could with the tools that he had at his disposal. Well, I'm thinking get new tools. All right? I mean, that sounds good for somebody that's, on the outside of my life, somewhere over here. Oh, I could find a way to forgive him. But this is my dad, for crying out loud. My entire life is ruled by this. And I can't let my dad off the hook. And we talk about my dad, and we talk about my dad, and I can't let my dad off the hook. The bottom of page 66, it says, this was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Though we didn't like their symptoms and the way they disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. Though we didn't like their symptoms, what they did to me, column 2, or the way they disturbed us, the way it affected me, column 3, they, like ourselves, were sick too. And he's trying to direct me to find a place where I can see that I'm like my dad. And I can't do it. So he gave up, and we started to talk about my mom, and he said, what about your mom? Tell me about your mom. And we talked about my mom, and we talked about her anger, and we talked about the way that she was towards me, and we talked about the fact that I didn't feel loved by her, and we talked about her panic attacks that she would have and the anger that she would have. And we started to talk about this part of the book. He says, you didn't like your mom's symptoms, which I didn't, or the way they disturbed you. They, like ourselves, were sick too. Could you imagine, Sheldon, if you were in your mom's shoes? Could you imagine if you were left with 2 young kids? Could you imagine if at that early age you found yourself trying to raise these 2 boys by yourself? Could you imagine, with the pressures and the difficulties that she had, what it might be like to be her and how you might have been in trying to raise those boys? And I'd never considered it. It says in the book, in the middle of the page there, it says we were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. I had never considered what it was like to be my mom, what it might have been like to be in her shoes. It had never entered my head. And I started to think about what it might have been like to be her. And if I'm honest, if I'm having a slightly bad day, let's say the alarm doesn't go off or I sleep through the alarm and I'm running 10 minutes late. When I come downstairs to the rest of the family, am I whistling? Or am I like, get out of my way, hurry up, for God's sakes, you guys are... Blah, 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 blah. I don't have to be under a lot of pressure to behave like I'm cranky and irritable, right? The pressure my mom was under, what might it have been like to be her? What might it have been like for her to live that life? And I start to consider for myself my mom's life and how it might have felt to be her. And it's shocking to me now as I look back that I had never considered that. It had never entered my head what my mom's life might have been like. And I started to, if I'm honest, I started to think how I might have behaved in her shoes. I have a beautiful wife and a great son, and I've yelled at my son inappropriately. Anyone that's a parent has found themselves sitting on the couch after they've sent the kid to his room and screamed at him thinking, oh my God, I'm so out of line. And I compound that with what it would have been like to be my mom. I start to get a little bit of compassion for her. I start to think to myself, if I was in her shoes, would I have behaved any better? And the truth is that I probably would have behaved worse based on my own experience with the way I am in my life. And I don't immediately let my mom off the hook. It's not like all of a sudden I want to go buy her roses and chocolates and run over to her house and cry at her feet. But I start to get a little bit of compassion for what it might have been like to be her. This is a sick man, the book says. When a person offended, we ask ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful? God, save me from being angry. In the middle of 67, it asked me, where had I been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? Where had I been dishonest? I had imagined that my mom was really capable of giving me the love that I wanted or demanded. What I thought, the way that I believed my mom was, and it's a little embarrassing to admit this, the way that I believed my mom was is that my mom could have done better easily, just decided not to. It's almost like I imagine she sat in the living room after me and my brother went to bed and thought, I could have been nice to them today, but I wasn't. And when I think about what it must have been like for her and the way that I treated her in light of her difficulties, what kind of son was I? In light of the way that my mom was struggling trying to raise us 2 boys and everything she went through, it says, where were we to blame? Where were we to blame? What kind of son was I in light of the struggles my mom had? And if I'm honest, I wasn't a good son. If I'm honest, I stole from her and I was disrespectful, and I just was a real pain in the ass is what I was. Not coming home, drinking, stealing money from her, screaming and yelling back at her. Just a bad deal. And in the middle of this conversation, my sponsor says to me, let's talk about your dad again for a minute. Why? He says, well, you say that your mom had some stuff going on that was difficult. She suffered from panic attacks. Your mom was a person that had a personality that was a little bit difficult to deal with, and all of that is true. He said, do you think that developed after your dad left, or do you think she was kind of always like that? Well, I don't know. I don't know. Do you think it's possible that your mom and dad might have got married early? before they really knew each other? Do you think your dad, maybe, would have found himself in a marriage that was difficult for him? Do you think your dad, maybe when he came home into that house and he put his hand on the door to come in the room, like you had described it was for you sometimes coming home from school, that he was afraid to go in the house because there was no fun or love for him there? Do you think maybe your dad found himself in a position where he looked at his future and he saw himself in a bleak and gray marriage and he didn't see any joy for his life and he felt like he was walking into a prison cell? And it wasn't your mom's fault, but it was the way your dad felt. Do you think when your dad looked at his future, it might have looked gray and dark? I don't know. If you were in your dad's shoes, if that was true, if your dad found himself in a difficult marriage and your dad imagined the next 50 or 60 years of his life to be gray and to be cold and to be no enjoyment in life, do you think that you would have stayed, or do you think that you may have left? I don't know. I don't know. What would you have done if you were in your dad's shoes, Sheldon? You know, the sad truth is that when I was 16 years old, I went down to the local government and I claimed my mom had thrown me out, and I signed on to my own welfare and got my own food stamps because I didn't want to live with her no more. What would I have done if I was my dad? I would have done exactly what my dad did. Where was I dishonest? Where was I self-seeking? Where was I afraid? I tell you, the dishonesty with my dad, and I got to cut this really short, but the dishonesty with my dad and the way that my life unfolded with my dad is so incredibly massive in my life. If you would have asked me, I would have told you that my dad ruined my life. That's what I would have told you. My dad ruined my life. The truth is that today I have a pretty good life. The truth is that today, you know, I have a great career. I own my own business. It's a struggle, but it's always a struggle when you have your own business. And I have a great financial situation. I'm married to a woman that adores me. I have a son that is a great kid. I have a great place in my community. I'm an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous with 1 million friends. And if you were to ask me why today, why is my life the way it is? You might be thinking it's because I'm an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous that creates that life, and you'd be partly right. But the truth is that the reason my life is the way that it is because my dad left when I was 2 years old. See, when I was 2 years old and my dad left, I lived in a small town in the north of England called Leeds, and it's a nice town, but it's not Las Vegas, Nevada. The reason that I'm in Las Vegas, Nevada, where I've created my career, met my wife, and had my position in the community in Alcoholics Anonymous, the reason I'm there is because when my dad left and he moved to London, then he moved to Canada, then he moved to Los Angeles, and when I was 16 years old and in trouble, he moved me to Los Angeles or Orange County, where I lived with him. And because my dad is the way my dad is, him and I got into some fights and arguments, and I left LA to get away from him, and I moved to Las Vegas. See, if my dad hadn't left, I wouldn't be in Las Vegas. And I might have a wife, but she may or may not adore me the way my wife adores me. I may have a son, but he wouldn't be the son that I have today. And I may have a career, who knows? It wouldn't be my life wouldn't look anything like it does today. Where is the dishonesty with my dad? The dishonesty is so huge. The selfishness. What did I really want my dad to do? Did I really want my dad to be depressed and suffer and have no happiness for the rest of his life so I could get what I wanted? What am I really like? When I think about my mom and my dad, in light of them not being mom and dad, but in light of them being human beings who part of their job was to be mom and dad, but they were much more than just a mom and a dad, and see them in 3 dimensions in a way that I had never seen them before. Some compassion and some freedom comes into me, like a crack in a wall that allows me to start to see them as more than just their titles. And that's, I think, part of my problem in all of my life is that when I look at you and I look at humanity, I don't look at you as people. I look at you as the title that I assign you. And then I expect you to play that role or that title perfectly. And the problem when you're looking at the people in those roles through the magnifying glass of my mind, no one is able to live up to the standards that I set forth for them. This is such a vital and important part of the book, this 180-degree turn that can happen here in this inventory, that it's almost a shame to try and get through it in such a short amount of time. I hope that I've been able to transmit to you a little bit of what happened with this relationship with my parents through this inventory, because then that trickles through. If I could be wrong about my dad, if I could be so wrong about my dad, couldn't I be wrong about my boss? Couldn't I be wrong about my brother? Couldn't I be wrong about the coworker, about the friend in the AA meeting, about the newcomer or the bleeding deacon? Couldn't I be wrong about just about everything? So when I have the guys write an inventory, the inventory looks something like this, just to kind of give you titles to the 6 columns that I like to do with guys. And that the first 3 columns are obviously like it is on page 65. I'm resentful at. The second column is the cause. The third column is what's affected. The fourth column is this was our cause. How am I like them? If I was in their shoes, could I imagine myself behaving the way they behaved? If I was driven by the fears they were driven by, had the concerns they had, could I have done what they did? The fifth column is where was I selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, or afraid? And that last 6th column is what should I have done instead, or where was I to blame? I really wish we had more time for this. That's all out of me, though. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks, Sheldon. Don, alcoholic? Morning, everybody. So jumping back into the 4th step, which Sheldon's done a great job covering resentment, I just want to make a couple of quick observations before I move on to the fear part of the inventory. You know, starting on the bottom of page 65, after we write our first 3 columns, it says that we're going to consider it carefully. And it says, the first thing apparent was that this world and its people were often quite wrong. To conclude that others were wrong was usually as far as most of us ever got. That is probably one of the truest statements about me that you can make. And it can be true today. You see, this is very important that when I read these directions, that I understand that these are going to be my directions for dealing with my resentments for the rest of my life. That it isn't something that I'm doing when I'm new in Alcoholics Anonymous and I come in and I have all of these manifestations of self that are showing up in my life. That really what I'm doing in inventory, it's one thing to say that I'm selfish and I'm self-centered and that's the root of my trouble. How does that show up in my life? What does that look like? How's that affecting me in my daily living? How is that making my life so uncomfortable that I have to anesthetize myself on a daily basis just to be on the planet? So I'm going to look for how it shows up in my life. I'm going to look at my resentments, my fears, and my sex life, and that's probably going to cover most of it. Not everything, but it's going to give me a really good look on how my self-centeredness is showing up in my life. So the first thing I have to do is I have to get to this point where I agree with that. Is that as far as I've ever gotten with my resentments, to conclude that others were wrong? And if that's true, then the next part that the book says, it's going to say the usual outcome is I'm sore, I'm burned out, people continue to harm me, I continue to feel like a victim. I continue to go through my life, and when I have conflict, what I do is I get resentful and I blame others. And so I'm constantly in a position of superiority. I'm constantly in a position of thinking that you're the problem, I don't have anything to do with it. If you only behaved, everybody would be pleased, including myself. So first of all, to agree with that, that chips away a big false truth that I've been carrying around my whole life. That I've gone through life, and wherever I've had conflict with others in this life, I've always blamed them instantly and been very comfortable with that. That I'm judge, jury, and executioner. And I do that alone. I don't do that with your counsel. I don't do that with a sponsor. I don't do that talking for out. I do that in my head. And I'm comfortable with that. And that's how I process this stuff. To the day I come to Alcoholics Anonymous, that is my way of processing resentments. I conclude others are wrong, and that's as far as most of us ever get, and that's certainly as far as I've got. And Sheldon talks about this great shift that it's so important that we make the shift, the 180-degree turn. And what I'm doing is I'm taking this process I've lived in my whole life, and I'm prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. And Sheldon did a great job talking about how we look at these things differently. There's something I want to touch on that's important, just a little side note, that the directions that start on the page of 66 and continue on the top of page 67, this is me preparing. Because it's one thing to say, I'm going to look at the list from an entirely different angle. Okay. If I'm not spiritually prepared to do that, I can't do that. And this is why. By this time in the process of the steps, in the second step, I had to come to a really strong realization and embrace it, which was lack of power was my dilemma. I had to find a power by which I could live, and it had to be a power greater than myself, obviously. Now notice when we read that in the second step, it didn't say I had to find a power by which I could stay sober. It didn't say I had to find a power by which I could quit drinking. What it said is I had to find a power by which I could live. And what we're talking about now is the business of life when we're talking about these resentments. So what I have to understand as I go into this, I don't have the power to do anything about this. I am powerless over these resentments. Now, I can intellectually absorb a lot of information about my resentments from my sponsor, from other AA members. But if I think by wishing it away, I'm going to be able to do something about it, the needed power isn't there. So what I'm doing is very spiritual in nature on the bottom of page 67 and 66 and the top of page 67. And what I'm doing is I'm praying. Now, prayer is a form of going to God and asking God for something that I don't have naturally. So what don't I have naturally? I don't have the same pity, patience that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. I don't have the ability to look at people as sick people. I don't have the ability to look at people that perhaps they're spiritually ill just like I am. So I have to go to God and ask God to help me remember this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? I ask God to save me from being angry. Thy will be done. So I'm going to God because I don't have the power to do anything about these resentments. If I think that the self-knowledge, like, yeah, I feel this way, I've been really selfish about this, I've never been willing to look at it from their point of view, and I think that there's going to be the needed power there to do anything about it, I'm wrong. And one of the reasons I'm wrong about thinking, I love my resentments. Now, I can say that today, and I would have denied that when I was new in Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, no, I don't want to be resentful. I don't want to be angry all the time. Why was I so angry? Why did I cling to my resentments? Why did I nurture them, feed them, protect them? Well, my resentments in my case were my explanation for a poorly lived life. You see, I can comfort myself with that tough neighborhood I came from, that family I came from, that dad that deserted the family. And Sheldon and I have the same story. I have a dad that left when I was 2 years old. He never looked back. That was the linchpin. That was the key resentment. That was the resentment that all other resentments came from. That's the resentment that painted me as a victim. That was my explanation for a poorly lived life. So it's valuable to me. And just understanding on the basis of self-knowledge the value of the resentment doesn't change anything either. I'm still resentful. I don't have any way to function without. This is the only way I know how to live. Now, there's something that I hear in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I hear it on a pretty regular basis, and I know where it came from. And what I hear is people in open meetings talk about resentment. And they say things like this, well, I went to work today with my boss, and boy, whew, I do not like my boss. She's just a sick puppy, let me tell you. But she can't help it. She's just evil, bless her heart. And but, you know, I'm an AA, and I might be the only one in that office that has a program. So I do what I've been taught in AA, and I'm praying for her. Because she can't help it. She's just sick. And then I'll hear somebody else share in Alcoholics Anonymous, and they'll go, yeah, you know, I'm pretty resentment. You know, I got a big resentment going with my, my landlord. I got this broken stuff at the house. And, he says he's going to fix it, and he never does. But, he's a phony. He's a fake guy is what he is. He's a fake guy. He can't help it. He's one of those guys that look at your face and don't lie, And I'm resentful, and he's very pissed off. I really want to kick his butt, but I'm not going to do it because I'm in AA, and I'm doing what the program says. I'm praying for him. I got to tell you, it's helping. I'm praying for him. I haven't hit him yet, but I'm praying for him. And so what I'm hearing in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous is when I have a resentment, I pray for somebody. And I know where it comes from. It comes from a story in the Big Book. And it comes in a story called Freedom from Bondage. And it's a great story, and it's about a woman that had a lot of resentments. In fact, she referred to her diary, and she goes, when I read my diary, everybody in my diary I had a resentment against. And she says that she went ahead and took all those resentments and did the work in the book, and every one of those resentments responded to the work in the book. But she had one she couldn't get rid of, just one, and it was her mother. And she was desperate to get rid of this resentment, and she couldn't figure out a way to do it. So she came across an article in a newspaper written by a clergyman that said, if you pray for this person every day for 2 weeks, wishing that they had everything that you would want for yourself, you will be free of this resentment. And she did that, and she became free of her resentment towards her mother. And I think it's a great story. But I also think it's important to note, she had 100 resentments. 99 of them she went through the process with, and 99 of them worked. One she couldn't get rid of. My concern is that people, what they're hearing in Alcoholics Anonymous is, when I have a resentment, I pray for others. Now, here's the only problem I have with that. I don't know, maybe you're spiritually developed in a place beyond where I understand. But when I pray for people, I almost notice I always do it from what? A position of inferiority or superiority. I'm always doing it from a position of superiority. And what I become naturally, without even knowing it, is I become the guy on page 66. To conclude that others were wrong was usually as far as I get. Because what I do is, you hurt my feelings, I go into resentment, I justify the resentment by saying, you're wrong, I'm right, you're sick, I'm well, that's a shame, sorry for you, I'm going to pray for you, you poor sick son of a bitch. And the problem with that process is I will never get the true gift of doing inventory. The biggest gift an alcoholic can ever get, which we around here, we call it the truth. You know, I came in and I had very, very deep-seated resentments. One of them, I'll tell you just briefly, was about my mother. Now, I can tell you two stories about my mother. And I can tell you about my mother, the alcoholic. I can tell you about growing up in poverty and insanity and screaming and physical violence and a lot of horrible things. And if I told you the story just right, hopefully you would feel sorry for me. And that was always my intention when I told that story. And I would demonize my mother. And when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I only had the ability to tell that story. I had no other story about my mother. I was filled with spite and rage and venom. Because it's funny, the things I conveniently forgot on my way to Alcoholics Anonymous as I lived the life of a drunk, as I lived in resentment, as I clung to these resentments as an explanation for a poorly lived life. And now I know the story that is true today because of inventory. I had a mother that raised 3 kids on her own, never took a dime of welfare, took 2 buses to work, 2 buses home to put food on that table, made sure we had clean clothes. We didn't have a lot, but she did what she could. You know, made sure that I had money to go play sports and organized teams, made sacrifices over and over and over again on Christmas and birthdays so we wouldn't feel like we were the odd poor family in the neighborhood. Yet this woman who sacrificed her entire adult life, who stayed when it would have been easier to leave, who adores me to this day and has never wanted anything but the best for me, I completely and utterly hated by the time I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. You see, that's what resentment does to me. It doesn't just destroy me, it destroys the people I'm resentful. It cuts me off. First it cuts me off from God, and then it cuts me off from you. So it's very important to me that I follow the directions in Alcoholics Anonymous, or I'm never going to get the gift out of there. Now, to talk about fear, bottom of page 67, notice the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Mrs. Jones, the employer, and the wife. This short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. It set in motion trains of circumstance which brought us misfortune we felt we didn't deserve. But did we ourselves set the ball rolling? Sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. It seems to cause more trouble. We think fear ought to be classed with stealing. So if we're going to put it in a classification, we're going to take fear, we're going to put it alongside there with stealing. Why is that important to me? Well, I understand stealing. How does fear steal? How is fear a thief? Biggest thief I ever known in my life is fear. Fear tells me I dare not look that way. Fear tells me it won't work out. Fear tells me I'm not enough. There's 2 basic human fears. Now, we can talk about the 1,000 fears we have. There's 2 basic ones. 1, I won't be loved, and 2, I'm not enough. And today in my life, when I'm in fear, I ask myself, which of those basic fears is being tampered with? Which one of those is being touched on? That I won't be loved or that I'm not enough? in matters of the heart usually gets both of them. I class it with stealing because what it does is it takes from me. It doesn't add anything to me. But what do we do about fear now that we understand fear and the fabric of our existence is shot through with it? Let's just not be afraid. Well, just go do it. Do the next right thing. Take the next right action. You see, we're forgetting that when we tell newcomers in AA, look, you're just afraid. Go take the next right action. Doesn't matter how you feel. Doesn't matter what you think. Just go do the next right thing. I'm forgetting that fear, I can't do anything about fear. It's a common manifestation of self. I read in the third step when I found out about my selfishness and self-centeredness that I could not get rid of it without God's help, nor could I reduce it much under my own power. I cannot get rid of the fear, nor can I reduce it much under my own power. This is not going to be about Don bringing it. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a self-help program. Alcoholics Anonymous is a self-sucks program. So I'm not going to take myself and apply it to any of these problems I have in my life. The needed power just isn't there. So I'm going to come down on the page here on page 68, and it's going to give me the directions. Perhaps there's a better way. We think so, for we are now on a different basis, the basis of trusting and relying upon God. When did that happen? Well, that happened in the third step for me. I made a decision to turn my will and life over to the care of God, so now I'm operating on a different basis. I'm in the world to play the role He assigns. I'm just trying to simply figure out what God would have me be. So now I'm on a different footing. We trust infinite God rather than our finite selves. We're in the world to play the role He assigns, just to the extent, and this is a kind of a math formula if you think about this, just to the extent that we do as we think He would have us and humbly rely on Him, does He enable us to match calamity with serenity. When I went through the book the first time, my sponsor said, what do you think that calamity is? I said, it's the warrants for my arrest. It's the 80 grand I owe the IRS. It's the fact I haven't worked in a year. It's the fact I'm 31 years old, new in Alcoholics Anonymous, living at my sister's house, no prospects. And he goes, no. The calamity is the wind blowing through the gut. The calamity is the storm in your mind when you think about the facts of your life. And what we're telling you here is just to the extent that you trust and humbly rely on God, no more and no less than that, to that extent, will you be rewarded with serenity to match that internal disturbance that has dogged you your whole life? That internal disturbance that has forced you to go out and drink time and time again because you can't face life on life's terms. That internal disturbance that tells you it's not going to work out for you. You'll be rewarded with that, but just to the extent that you trust and humbly rely on God. Now, there's some directions here about what I'm going to do about my fear, and these directions are very important to me because I use these directions in my day-to-day living today. I have some form of fear that pops up in my life on a daily basis. Now, because I'm 26 years old and sophisticated and my ego tells me I shouldn't have fear any longer at this point of the game, I will try to minimize what is truly fear. I will say things like this: I'm not afraid, I'm concerned. No, I'm afraid. And it doesn't get any less embarrassing when your ego's involved. When your ego's involved and you're 6'5" and 280 pounds and you're 26 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, I feel embarrassed at times to let people know the role that fear is playing in my life. But I had to get over that embarrassment so I could go to God and trust Him and show up in a humble manner and be able to go to God and say, I'm just afraid, Dad. I don't know what to do. I know I shouldn't feel this way, and I know what to do. Nobody needs to tell me what to do. I know what the action is to take, but I can't seem to take the action. The needed power isn't there. So you see, I have to go to God, and I have to first ask Him to remove my fear, and that's a prayer. In prayer, I say, God, please remove this fear. Remove this fear of applying for the job. Remove that fear for applying to college. Remove that fear of making that amends. Remove that fear of showing up and asking that girl out. Remove that fear of going back to those people and cleaning up that mess. Whatever the fear is, I ask specifically for God to remove that fear. Why? Prayer is a form of asking something that I do not have the ability naturally to do on my own. I do not have the power to overcome my fear. I have to be specific and go to God and ask Him to remove it. And then I ask in prayer to direct my attention to what He would have me be. And as I said yesterday, all my life, I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what they want me to be, what she wants me to be, what the world wants me to be, what I think I should be. For what? To get what I want. I'll be anything you want me to be, show you anything you want to see, manipulate you in any way I can, but underneath all that, bet your bottom dollar is a guy trying to get his own way. We're trying to break away from that self-centered way of approaching life. I'm trying to live on the service plane. So now in prayer, I ask God to direct my thinking. Why? Because my thinking is in what direction? The fear. I'm thinking about the fear, what's going to happen. They're going to say this, and I'm going to say that, and then they're going to say that, and then I'm going to punch them, and then I won't have the job. That's how it works in my head. I have to have a new form of thinking. You know, one of the most overlooked areas of our recovery, in my humble opinion, is our thought life. We're terrified of it. And when we're new, we kind of get drilled, don't we? Doesn't matter what you think, doesn't matter how you feel, just matters what you do. The world will judge you by your intentions, or by your actions, not by your intentions. And so we fall in love with that, right? Because what we do is we find out that we can do the right thing even though we're thinking the wrong thing. And people will say things to you in Alcoholics Anonymous like this: hey, listen, man, nobody ever went to jail for thinking about robbing a bank. And that's true, but nobody ever robbed a bank without thinking about it first. So to completely ignore our thought life, I think, is a dangerous proposition. I don't think that we have to be afraid of our thoughts anymore. I think that we've just tapped into an unsuspected inner resource. I think that we've now just started in a commitment and a relationship with God as we understand him. And I believe the power of God goes deep. I believe there's no problem I can bring to my God that he can't take care of. So the humbleness required in this fear exercise is understand I'm in a state of humility, which means I'm aware of my shortcomings, which is I can't do anything about it. I know that. My power will not be necessary to overcome fear. I ask God to remove my fear. I ask him to direct my thinking to what he would have me be. Now I have an idea, a vision in my mind of what I look like if I wasn't scared. What would I look like if I actually believed in God? What would I do if I actually had a relationship with God and believed that all the power of the universe was at my disposal to do the right thing? What would that guy look like? Not me, but that guy. And now that I have that, what the book promises me is I commence to outgrow fear. It doesn't say the fear is removed. It says I commence to outgrow fear, and commence just means to begin. Now, why is that important to me? Listen, I only know two things that kill fear. Only two. One is whiskey, and the other is action. Now, I can't do anything about the whiskey. I don't drink anymore. The only thing I know that's going to kill fear is action. Here's the problem. I don't have the power to get to the action. You see, I'm on the couch. My feet are rooted to the floor. I know the right thing to do. I just can't get up and even start to do it. But when I ask God to remove my fear and direct my thinking, what happens is the fear reduces. I commence to outgrow it. That's all I need. That's called an opportunity. It's a reduction in the fear. You feel it. You actually feel that fear reduce. Not go away. It's still on your mind. You're still scared, but it reduces enough for what? Get into action. We never sit and wait for the fear to be completely removed. What we do is we begin to outgrow the fear, and then with God, we go and take care of business. And we invite God into our life. God, I'm so scared. Will you come with me? And God always says, yes, I'll be there with you. We show up where we have to show up. We open the door, and we say, after you, God, and we let God walk in first. And what we do is now we start walking through things in our life that we don't think we can do. And we make it through. We find out the truth about the fear. Fear turns out to be the boogeyman. Fear turns out to be something manufactured in our own mind. And we take a little bit of experience and we go, oh my God, I was so scared. And we put it in our pocket and we go, I was wrong about that. That thing I was so scared of. You know, and people say that time doesn't matter in Alcoholics Anonymous. I disagree. Sober experiences, you only get it one day at a time, but it's so valuable because you pay attention to this stuff. And I got pockets full of experiences that say it was just fear. And now when I'm in fear on a daily basis, I can go, you know what? I bet it's just like that other thing. And I will be driving down the road on my way to an appointment. I'm trying to close a deal. That deal represents something to me. Represents money, security, represents my sex life. My wife likes me a lot more when I can pay the bill. I mean, I'm telling you. And suddenly that becomes the most important thing in the world. And I will feel anxious and I will feel concerned and I will be rehearsing in my mind and I will say this when they say that and I am cut off from God because I am running the show. And I'll feel this anxiety coming up in me and I will stop and go, what's going on with you, Landis? What's going on right now? And I'll go, man, I'm just in fear. I'm just scared. And I'll say, God, I'm afraid this deal isn't going to go my way and I know that's not my business, that's your business. If I'm supposed to get it, I'll get it. My job's to be a service. Please take this fear away from me. Direct my thinking to what you would have me be. Suddenly I feel the fear start lifting. Suddenly I'm back with God. Suddenly I don't care whether I close the deal or not. Now I've got a different approach. He's directed my thinking. Now I'm showing up somewhere just being a service. And whether I get the deal or not, I'm going to be okay. And that's what this exercise does for me. We're going to take a break right now. We're going to be back. We're on a tight schedule today. So when I say 10 minutes, we're going to fire this thing back up at 5 after 10. Thank you. Now about sex. And we're going to look at the sex inventory, which actually isn't about sex. Which I thought was going to be very exciting because we're all legends in our own mind, aren't we? Anyway. The first thing I want to talk about is some of the directions in the book, starting on page 68 and continuing on page 69. And the first thing that the author, Bill Wilson, is trying to do is let us know, like, look, we're going to go into these waters, and this is what we know. Everybody's got an opinion, and they're all different. One of the things that's very important for me to do, particularly as a sponsor, as I go through the work with a sponsee, is I don't superimpose my morals on top of anyone else. Because I have my own set of morals, I am comfortable with them, I have my own set of conduct, I am comfortable with it. It doesn't mean that my morals or my conduct is right for everybody. So I have to be very careful, and that is what Bill starts off talking. Many of us need an overhauling there, but above all, we try to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes perhaps. And then it goes on to talk about people that cry for sex and more sex, people that think the root of all trouble is that it's sex, people that would have you have no flavor for your fare, others that want us on a straight pepper diet. More importantly, on page 69, about 10 lines down, it says, we want to stay out of this controversy. We do not want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't, but what can we do about them? And now we're going to get into directions for what we're going to do. We're going to review our conduct over the past year. So I'm going to write down what I was told to do and what I do with my guys. I just write down everybody I've been in a relationship with, right? I'm just going to write that down. And I'm going to ask some really simple questions of myself. Where have I been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Who have I hurt? Now, the thing about that is a lot of people think when it says, whom have we hurt, that we're talking about the person we're in a relationship with. That's not true. There were a lot of people that were hurt by my behaviors over the years. There's infidelity, there's unfaithfulness, there's messing around in places I shouldn't have been messing around, knowing that was going to hurt somebody, not caring what it made the other guy feel like. I'm going to get what I want when I want it. All of these things. So there is ripples. There's a rock dropped into these waters, and it sends these negative ripples out. And a lot of people get caught in that. So when it talks about who am I hurt, I have to expand the view to just who I'm in that relationship with. It's a lot of times it's many other people that are involved. I continue to ask myself questions. Did I unjustly arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? What is that about? Jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Well, what I found out when I did my inventory is I knew very little about love in the true sense of the word. I was an expert at bartering. I was wonderful at doing what I thought you wanted me to do so I could get what I wanted to get. And if you didn't give me what I wanted, then I would stop giving you what you wanted. So I know nothing of love. I know nothing of caring for somebody for free and for fun. I know nothing about a true partnership. What I do is I have a set of needs that I want to have met. And I want you to meet these needs. But because I'm dishonest, I don't know how to go to you and go, these are my needs. Would you care to meet them? That would please me. Thank you very much. What I do is I go on a psychic mission where I try to figure out what would make you happy and give me what I want. And when I don't get what I want from you, I am disturbed by that. Anybody that's ever been asked, would you help me move by a pretty girl knows why we help the pretty girl move. Just being honest. And as you're loading that couch up with that other dummy who showed up to help her move, and you're looking at the competition, you're thinking, oh, I'm better looking than him. And when they say, well, I don't know how to thank you, I couldn't have done this without you, this is what you think. Well, I know how you could thank me. Even when I'm kind, even when I'm generous, underneath all that is a selfish, self-centered personality. And I do that in my relationships, don't I? I tell you, I love you, baby. You're so good to me. I'm so happy to be with you. Now do what I want you to do so we can get along. And if you don't do what I want you to do, we don't get along. Will I arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Of course, I'll throw that in the water. That's the chum I throw in the water. I'll keep you off balance. I don't want you to think you got my whole heart. I'll go out. I won't come home when I'm supposed to come home. You'll say, where were you? Out. With who, people? What were you doing, stuff? Why won't you answer my questions? I'll tell you what, are you writing a book? Why don't you leave this out and call it a mystery? How about that? I will arouse jealousy. I will arouse suspicion. I will ask you in the kindest ways, and this goes back to the third step when we're reading about the actor. I can be kind, considerate, generous. On the other hand, I can be mean and demanding and egotistical. Why do babies cry? Because it works, right? Cute little baby, little 2-year-old sitting in his playpen, hanging onto the rail, just being cute, and Dad walks by. Dad's got stuff in his mind. Dad's on his way to the kitchen to go do something. Baby sees Dad. There's Dad. I love Dad. He lights up. Gets even cuter as he watches Dad walk by. That's weird. Dad walked by. Why didn't he stop? Didn't he know I was here? Didn't he know I'm the apple of his eye? I mean, well, come on, Dad. And then Dad leaves the kitchen, going back into the study, and, oh, it's okay. Here's another shot. Now the baby's extra cute. Dad walks right by, doesn't even look at him. Son of a gun. Dad didn't even see me. Third time Dad comes by, baby screams, wah! Dad stops. Walks over. Picks up the baby, cuddles the baby. This is what the baby thinks. Well, that worked. Baby changed techniques to get what the baby wanted. I find myself as an adult, man, I'm a 2-year-old in grown-up relationships, changing my techniques to get what I want. I'll be cute, I'll be kind, I'll be generous, I'll be self-sacrificing. I'll be all these wonderful things. But if that doesn't work, I could be mean, egotistical, and demanding. I will just change techniques, and underneath that, here's a guy that wants what I want when I want it. And if I don't get it, I will make you pay the price. I'll make you wish you gave it to me. That's who you're in a relationship with. We put each relationship to the test. Was it selfish or not? Good Lord, I wish there was one I could tell you that wasn't selfish. It's a trick question for guys like me. When I got all that down on paper and looked at it, it became very apparent to me I didn't know anything about love. I knew about negotiation. I have expectations of every kind thing I do in a relationship. I am a scorekeeper. How do I know that? God, I wish I could tell you because of what's happened to me in Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm not a scorekeeper. Good Lord, God forbid my wife comes at me with something she's discontent about. There's a screen that pops up right in the left side of my head. It's every good thing I've done in the last 21 years. It's just there, taunting me. I can't believe she's saying this to me after all I've done for her. I mean, I'm a scorekeeper today. I don't want to be. I may not act on it. I may know that about myself, but to say that I'm no longer like that would be a lie. But I know how selfish I am. But once again, what are we talking about? Self-knowledge. I can't do anything about it. I'm a negotiator. I'm a barter. I want what I want when I want. I don't mind giving you what you want as long as I get what I want. God forbid I did more than you. God forbid it wasn't 50-50. You know what I found out about relationships? They're not 50-50. I don't know what they are. Some days they're 90-10, and some days I'm the 90, and some days I'm the 10. It all works out in the end, but I had to have a different attitude about it. But the needed power isn't there. I can't do anything about it. I do this inventory, I look down, and all it says is, Don's a scumbag. He's been in 7 major relationships. He's 0-7. You know? That's not a good winning percentage. So what do I do about that? Whatever my new idea comes out to be, because I'm trying to form a sane idea for my future sex life, my future relationships. And once I have this sane idea, I must be willing to grow through it. But I ask God, on page 69, we ask God to help mold our ideas and help us live up to them. We remember that our sex powers were God-given, therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishly, nor to be despised and loathed. And then whatever this idea turns out to be, and that's a personal idea. That's not my sponsor's idea or AA's idea or my church's idea or even my wife's idea. This is my idea. I have to be willing to grow through it, and I have to have God mold that idea. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it. God alone can judge our sex situation. Counsel with other persons is desirable, but we must let God be the final judge. We realize that some people are as fanatical about sex as others are loose. We avoid hysterical thinking or advice. Why is that? I'm a shopper. How about you? When you got something going on in your life, do you shop for answers? I do. Nothing I hate worse than being locked in about something going on in my marriage. So and now I've been married a long time, and I know a lot of married guys. I know where to go. I know to stay away from those guys that just agree with everything their wife says, and their wives are always right. He's going to be no help at all to me. He's going to give me some spiritual answer. I want the guy that's going to go, yeah, you're right. I'd be pissed too. That's my guy. Water seeks its own level. I'm looking for company in my misery. Counsel with others is not desirable. The only person I talk to about this stuff is God and my sponsor, who knows how selfish I am. That is where I'm going with this stuff, because I'll tell you what I will do instinctively is I will find like-minded people. And if my mind happens to be sick and selfish at that moment, I'm looking for sick and selfish to go talk to about my problems. And I'm always surprised when people agree with me. That's by design. That's not by accident. I know where to go to hear what I want to hear. And I know over the years I have found myself in that selfish situation where I find myself and somebody is giving me good orderly direction, and I will pull away from their advice because it doesn't line up with what I think. So I'm not really looking for advice, am I? I'm looking for confirmation. I'm looking for agreement. I'm looking for you to tell me I'm right, that I should feel that way. And once again, I'm separating myself from the truth. But the thing about this divine spark, this idea of God that lives inside each of us, I've never gone to God in any situation, in my marriage particularly, and asked honestly what would God have me do and not got an answer. Now, it has not always been the answer I've wanted. I will admit that. But I've always got the answer, and I've always recognized it as correct. Whether or not I wanted to take that direction from God is really between me and God. Suppose I fall short of this new idea and stumble. Does this mean I'm going to get drunk? Some people tell us so, but this is only a half-truth. It depends on us and our motives. If we are sorry for what we have done and have an honest desire to let God take us to better things, we believe we will be forgiven. We would have learned our lesson. If we are not sorry and our conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink. We are not theorizing. These are facts out of our experience. So I don't have to be perfect. I have a new idea about my future sex life. Does that mean if I'm selfish, I'm going to get drunk? Does that mean that if I'm thinking about me and not the other person, does that mean if I'm arousing jealousy or suspicion in my marriage that I'm automatically going to get drunk? No. What it says is if I continue to do it and I don't feel bad about it and I'm not willing to grow towards a new idea, I most certainly will get drunk, because that kind of behavior cuts me off from God. And if my very existence is a spiritual awakening and a conscious contact with a power greater than myself, if my very life depends on that conscious contact, anything that tampers with that contact or cuts me off from it can be listed as fatal. So anything that tampers with the relationship with God can ultimately be fatal. And all these things that we're talking about, our resentments, our fears, our behavior in our sex life, these manifestations of self, the way that they're infinitely grave is that they sever our connection with God. They in themselves might look like bad behavior. The fatality of them isn't the bad behavior. It's not what I'm doing that's going to kill me. It's that when I'm doing that, I am cut off from God. I'm cut off from the power. I'm cut off from the answer. I'm cut off from the solution, and I'm living in self-will. I am once again bringing a knife to a gunfight because I am taking on my alcoholism with self-will, and that'll never work. I am alone when I'm in those states. And if you don't believe me, next time you get a really good resentment going, I'm not talking about where you're intellectually processing. I'm talking about when you're in fury, when you're practicing spiritual restraint, where I'm just going to shut up and keep my hands in my pockets so angry, where you're reverberating, try to pray. Good luck. Can't do it. I'm cut off. I want to talk about the fifth step really quickly. In fact, I'm going to do this really quickly, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sheldon, who's going to talk a little bit, about the fear inventory again, and then about the fifth step. The most important thing in the fifth step, and I'm not going to get into the two things I want to talk about that are most important to me. One, when I hear a fifth step, I always do it on a weekend. I block out the whole day. In the fifth step directions, it says we're prepared for a long talk. What I don't want, and this is just for me and my sponsorship family, we don't want anybody to come over, start a fifth step, and go, it's getting late, I got to work tomorrow, let's pick this up tomorrow. I really take it as an honor and privilege to hear a fifth step. I can't imagine how I would have felt if I sat down with my sponsor and halfway through that, the most important moment of my life, my important moment of my recovery up to that point, he had said, okay, we got to take a break, this is getting a little long-winded, we'll pick it up tomorrow. So I try to always set up enough time that no matter how long it goes, we'll have enough time to get it done. The other thing is, I think there's a really important direction in the fifth step, which is on page 72. And I think that this is something, there's things in the book that we compartmentalize, right? We'll take something in the book and we'll go, oh, they're talking about the fifth step here. And we think it only applies to the fifth step. I think this is one of the most important spiritual directions in the book. It applies to my whole recovery. And on page 72, towards the middle of the second paragraph, it says, we usually find a solitary self-appraisal insufficient. I've done a solitary self-appraisal when I'm done with my fourth step. In the fifth step, it's telling me that we find this insufficient. I think that's a huge spiritual principle, not just about the inventory process. I think it's about transparency. I think it's about honesty. I think it's about living out loud. I think it's about standing up behind the hedge of life and letting people see me. I think it's about stopping this business of presenting to the world my stage character, where I want to enjoy a certain reputation, but in my heart, I know I don't deserve it. That's the old behavior. If you want to know what my old behavior is, that's it. I show you what I think I want you to see so I can get what I want. Solitary self-appraisal is insufficient. So I have to ask myself, at 26 years of sobriety, how much of my life am I running alone? How much of it am I doing in the dark with just my thoughts? How much of it am I really doing it with a sponsor? How much do people really know about me? How transparent am I really willing to live? Am I living in that solitary self-appraisal where I live my life and I'm the judge, jury, and executioner of all my business? My sponsor doesn't need to know about that. Other people in AA don't need to know about it. I can just handle that on my own. Have I fallen victim to the folly of self-sufficiency again based on my length of sobriety? Do I think that I don't need to do the basic things in Alcoholics Anonymous in terms of transparency and disclosing how I'm really living, thinking, and acting? Do I think I don't need to do that any longer? Has my ego stepped in, and is it building a wall between me and you, between me and God, between me and my sponsor, because I think I should be better than that now? Do I think a solitary self-appraisal is sufficient? Not just where inventory is concerned, but where everything is concerned. The last thing I want to say about the fifth step, and this is for anyone that hasn't done one yet or has just finished one, I was very excited about doing my fifth step, and this is why. People in Alcoholics Anonymous would show up in the AA meeting after they did their fifth step, and they'd raise their hand, oh, call on me. The chairperson would ignore them as long as they could, and they'd finally call on them. And they'd say, I just wanted to let everybody know I did my fifth step last night. And everybody, yay! And they'd all applaud, and they'd go, I know. Oh, you guys told me it'd be wonderful, but I had no idea. I just feel like the weight of the world is falling off my shoulders. I knew I was an AA member, but now I feel like I've really joined the tribe. I feel part of the universe. I feel I'm walking hand in hand with God down the broad highway. And I'm listening to this, right? I can't sleep at night. I'm racked with shame, guilt, and remorse. I hate myself. I'm suicidal and homicidal on that pendulum in 15-minute periods, you know what I mean? And I'm listening to all this wonderful stuff that's going to happen in the fifth step, and I want me some of that. So I do my fifth step, and I know it's going to be great. I'm waiting for the gift. And a day goes by, and I don't feel any better. 2 days go